By the time Karen Holt called the crater behind Ethan Walker's ranch natural erosion, Ethan already had 3 years of truck records. She stood at the edge of the gravel cut, arms folded, insisting no HOA vehicle had ever removed a load. Ethan said nothing. He laid the dispatch sheets across the hood of his pickup and tapped one truck number. The same truck had entered his backfield 47 times, and if one truck had left that much evidence, Ethan wanted to know what the entire fleet had taken. If you like stories where quiet facts matter more than loud threats, subscribe and stay with this one, because what looked like a scar in an unused field would soon turn into a record of every mile, every ton, and every invoice the HOA thought nobody would ever connect. 6 months earlier, Ethan Walker had not been looking for a fight with anyone. He was 46, owned a modest cattle and hay operation outside Cedar County, and spent most mornings doing the kind of work that left little room for neighborhood politics. The western half of his property faced County Road. The eastern edge ran along Westfield Ridge, a planned community of trimmed lawns, decorative stone entrances, and an HOA that had grown rapidly over the previous decade. Between them sat Ethan's backfield, a rough 18-acre stretch screened by cottonwoods and a low ridge. It was useful land, but not land he crossed every day. He grazed cattle there in dry months, cut brush twice a year, and checked the fence whenever storms came through. That spring, after several days of heavy rain, Ethan noticed water standing where it never used to stand. A shallow drainage line that had always carried runoff toward the south pasture was suddenly feeding a muddy pool near the tree line. He assumed a fallen limb had blocked a culvert, so he drove his pickup around the ridge to inspect it. The moment he cleared the cottonwoods, he stopped. The ground was wrong. A section of land he remembered as gently sloping away from the fence had dropped into a broad depression. It was not a sinkhole. It was too wide, too stepped, and too clean along the upper edges. Exposed bands of pale gray gravel ran through the cut. Tire tracks crossed the lower floor in parallel grooves, curved toward a gap in the fence, and disappeared through the trees in the direction of Westfield Ridge. Ethan sat behind the wheel for nearly a minute before getting out. He had owned the property for 16 years. Before that, his uncle had farmed it. Ethan knew where old terraces had collapsed, where cattle had worn paths into hillsides, where the soil turned red after a foot of digging, and where gravel rose naturally close to the surface. He also knew erosion. Erosion did not leave a loading shelf wide enough for a dump truck to turn around. He walked the perimeter slowly. Near the top of the cut, dark topsoil had been pushed into 2 low berms as if someone had stripped it away before digging deeper. Fresh weeds covered some portions, while older grass had grown over others. That told him the disturbance had not happened in a single week or even a single season. It had happened in stages. At the fence line, 3 steel posts had been pulled and reset several yards apart, creating an opening wide enough for heavy equipment. The wire had been spliced rather than broken. Whoever had done it had expected to come back. Beyond that opening was a compacted track Ethan had never built. He did not accuse anyone. Not yet. He took photographs from every angle, marked the location on his phone, and drove to the county records office the next morning. He checked recent drainage permits, utility work, road easements, and public maintenance projects touching his parcel. Nothing explained the excavation. No county crew had been authorized to enter. No utility had filed for temporary access. There was no emergency work order. For the first time, Ethan stopped thinking about erosion and started thinking about trucks. He went home and opened an old folder of property surveys. The rear boundary had not moved. The HOA service road had been built entirely on the other side of his fence. Whatever had happened in the back field had happened on land that was unquestionably his. That evening, standing on the ridge as the sun dropped behind the barn, Ethan looked down at the cut again. He could follow the tire path with his eyes from the exposed gravel, through the open fence, and toward Westfield Ridge. The question was no longer what had changed the field. The question was who had needed a road into it. Ethan called the Westfield Ridge office the next morning and asked for the board president. Karen Holt returned his call within 20 minutes. Her tone was courteous at first, almost impatiently so. She said the association had no active project near his property and suggested the runoff might have come from the spring storms. Ethan told her he had found a graded access track connecting the HOA service road to an excavation inside his fence. There was a short silence. Then Karen asked whether he was certain the land was his. That question told Ethan more than her answer had. He emailed photographs and requested that someone from the HOA meet him at the site. Karen arrived the following afternoon in a white SUV with Martin Keene, the association's maintenance manager. She wore clean boots that looked new and carried a slim leather folder. Martin brought no tools, no maps, and no survey to the edge of the cut. Karen looked down for perhaps 5 seconds before saying, "That's a natural gravel depression. You get erosion back here. Everybody knows that." Ethan turned toward her. "Everybody?" She ignored the question. Martin stepped closer to the edge, looked at the exposed layers, and said the county had experienced unusual runoff over the last few years. Ethan pointed to the flat loading shelf at the bottom, the parallel tire marks, and the topsoil berms. Karen crossed her arms. "Mr. Walker, Westfield Ridge buys all road material from licensed suppliers. We do not operate a quarry, and we certainly do not mine private property." Ethan asked why a truck road ran from the bottom of his excavation directly to the HOA service lane. Karen said it was an old maintenance track used for drainage inspections. "Who built it?" "I couldn't tell you." "Who opened my fence?" "I don't know that anyone did." Ethan led them to the 3 reset posts. One still had a newer galvanized staple driven beside a rusted original. Martin looked away first. Karen's voice sharpened. She suggested Ethan had noticed the value of the HOA's recent road projects and was trying to create a compensation claim after the fact. Ethan let her finish. He had learned long ago that people often explained more when they believed silence meant weakness. Then he asked one question. "Show me the easement, lease, license, or agreement that gives your association the right to remove material from this parcel." Karen's expression changed only slightly. "We have maintained this area for years. That isn't what I asked. The association has historic access rights. For drainage? For community infrastructure. Does that include taking gravel?" Karen closed the folder. "If you have a legal concern, send it to our counsel." Ethan nodded. "I will." Ethan did not argue or accuse her of theft. He photographed the site, wrote down Karen's phrases, and sent himself a summary before driving home. He wanted a record, not a confrontation. That night he pulled every document he owned relating to the back field. The original deed contained no HOA covenant. A 1998 utility easement allowed a power cooperative to inspect poles along the northern boundary. A county drainage agreement permitted workers to maintain a ditch 20 feet from the eastern line. Neither document granted Westfield Ridge anything. The next morning, Ethan visited the recorder's office again and asked for every recorded easement, amendment, right-of-way, lease, mineral agreement, and maintenance agreement tied to his parcel number. The clerk printed the index twice. There was no Westfield Ridge easement, no gravel lease, no extraction agreement, no temporary construction license, no recorded right allowing the HOA to cross the fence at all. Ethan stood at the counter reading the same list a third time. Karen had been very confident about historic access rights, but confidence was not a document. He asked the clerk whether an unrecorded agreement could exist. "Sure," she said, "but if somebody says they have one, make them show it." Ethan folded the index into his folder. That was exactly what he intended to do. And as he walked back to his truck, one detail from the meeting kept returning to him. Karen had denied that the HOA mined private property, but she had never once asked who might have created the road. She had only tried to explain why it was there. 3 days later, Ethan returned to the back field with the tape measure, marking flags, and a notebook. He wanted a rough sense of the cut before paying a surveyor to map it. He started along the north edge, where weeds had grown tallest, and worked toward the fence gap. Near one of the reset posts, something white showed beneath a mat of dried grass. At first, he thought it was a feed sack. He pulled it loose and found a rectangular sheet of heavy paper, water-stained, folded twice, and smeared with mud. Most of the printing was still readable. It was a scale ticket. Across the top was the name Ridgeline Hauling. Beneath it were a date, a truck number, a driver code, tear weight, gross weight, net weight, and a job number. The pickup description had been shortened to 2 words, back NIF. The destination line read WFR Resurfs. Ethan stared at it. He took a photograph before moving it again, placed it in a plastic sleeve from his truck, and drove home. The date on the ticket was 32 months old. He searched online for Ridgeline Hauling and found a regional aggregate carrier that worked with construction companies and municipalities. The truck number was written as RL214. The job code was longer, WFR 1906. Ethan opened the public packet from a Westfield Ridge board meeting he had downloaded months earlier during a dispute over drainage. Buried in the meeting minutes was a road project approved during the same year, Phase 6 resurfacing. The internal reference beside it was WFR 1906. One piece of paper had connected the excavation to a specific HOA project. But Ethan knew what it did not prove. It did not prove where that load had been picked up. Backfield could mean anything in a trucking company's internal shorthand. It did not prove Karen knew about it. It did not prove there were more loads. And it certainly did not establish how much material had disappeared from his property. So Ethan resisted the easiest mistake. He did not call Karen. Instead, he checked the camera system on his equipment shed. It did not cover the backfield, but one camera faced the gravel lane behind the barn. Most old footage had been overwritten. A separate archive, however, saved short motion clips whenever vehicles crossed the edge of the frame at night. Ethan searched the month printed on the ticket. It took nearly 2 hours. Then a clip appeared. At 6:18 in the morning, before sunrise, a red dump truck crossed the far end of the frame heading east. The image was grainy. Ethan could not read the plate, but a white number was visible high on the door. 214. He leaned closer to the screen. 43 minutes later, the same truck returned west, riding visibly higher on its suspension. Ethan checked the next day. Nothing. 2 days later, 214 appeared again. Then another Ridgeline truck, then 2 more. The archive was incomplete because motion detection had not always triggered at that distance, but the pattern was enough to change the question. These were not random construction vehicles accidentally crossing his land. They were heavy trucks using a repeated route. Ethan created a back-and-feed folder for photographs, county records, camera clips, HOA minutes, and correspondence. Then he opened a spreadsheet: date, truck, direction, time in, time out, visible load status, related HOA project. He entered only what he could support. By midnight, he had 17 vehicle movements tied to dates in the archived footage. The next morning, he called Ridgeline Hauling. He did not accuse the company of anything. He asked whether they retained dispatch and scale records from old projects. The receptionist paused. For how long? Several years, if the account was commercial. Ethan looked at the ticket inside its plastic sleeve. Would that include individual truck weights? If they were run through a scale, yes. Truck numbers? Yes. Pickup and delivery locations? Usually. Ethan thanked her and hung up. For the first time since seeing the excavation, he felt the shape of the problem change. A hole could be argued over. Tire tracks could fade. Memories could be challenged. Truck records were different. Every load had required a driver, a dispatch, a weight, a time, and a destination. And somewhere, if Ridgeline had kept what its receptionist said it kept, there might be a line for every single trip. Ethan hired a surveyor before he tried to obtain anything from Ridgeline. Daniel Price had worked in Cedar County for 27 years and had no connection to Westfield Ridge. He arrived with a field assistant, a total station, old parcel maps, and the kind of patience Ethan trusted. Ethan gave him the deed, the recorded plats, the county drainage map, and photographs of the excavation. He did not tell Daniel what he thought had happened. "I need to know what changed," Ethan said. "Not who did it." Daniel nodded. "That's the right question." They spent most of the day mapping the field. The cut was larger than it looked from the ridge because the surrounding slope hid its depth. Daniel measured the floor, the stepped sides, the remaining gravel face, and the altered drainage channel. He also located the original fence line and confirmed that the entire excavated area sat inside Ethan's parcel. No portion crossed onto HOA property. A week later, Daniel returned with something more valuable than opinion. He had located older topographic data from a county watershed study, aerial photographs from multiple years, and archived elevation information captured before Westfield Ridge began its most recent road program. By layering the old surface over the current survey, he could estimate how much material had disappeared. The first model showed more than 30,000 cubic yards. Ethan stared at the number. Daniel warned him not to treat it as final. Gravel density varied. Slopes had been disturbed. Topsoil had been moved. Some material could have been redistributed within the field, so they refined the model. They compared visible gravel bands with old soil maps. They excluded the topsoil berms. They separated areas where runoff had genuinely eroded the surface from areas showing mechanical cuts. They marked a narrow drainage channel as natural loss rather than excavation. Even after those reductions, the result remained enormous. Daniel placed several aerial images on Ethan's kitchen table. In the oldest image, the backfield was intact. In another taken 3 years later, a pale patch appeared near the eastern fence. The next image showed that patch wider. By the following road construction season, the excavation had extended north, then deeper, then south. It had not formed in one dramatic event. It had grown in phases. Ethan pulled out the Westfield Ridge meeting packets he had downloaded. One year, the HOA approved reconstruction of Juniper Lane. The next year, it rebuilt the North Loop. Later came Hillcrest Drive and the Clubhouse Access Road. Daniel did not need Ethan to point out the pattern. He set the aerial dates beside the project dates and said, "That's interesting. Each major expansion of the cut occurred within months of a major HOA road project." Daniel still refused to say the HOA caused it. "That is not what a survey proves," he said. "I can tell you material is missing. I can tell you the disturbance is mechanical. I can tell you roughly when different portions changed. Somebody else has to prove where the material went." That restraint made Ethan trust him more. Daniel's written report ultimately estimated that between 34,000 and 38,000 cubic yards of gravel-bearing material had been removed, depending on the original grade assumptions. At ordinary bulk density, the weight could easily reach tens of thousands of tons. The number made Ethan think of the scale ticket. One truck had carried just over 19 tons. He did not yet know whether there had been hundreds of loads or thousands, but now he could calculate what a fleet would need to move. He also learned that the gravel itself was only part of the damage. Removing the material had changed the slope feeding the south pasture. Restoring the field would require engineered fill, compacting, replacement topsoil, drainage work, erosion control, reseeding, and probably a new fence line. If the lowest section continued collecting water, part of the pasture could become unusable. Karen had called it a natural depression. Daniel's report used very different language: progressive mechanical excavation. Ethan read that phrase twice. Then he placed the survey timeline beside Westfield Ridge's construction calendar. Juniper Lane, the North Loop, Hillcrest Drive, the Clubhouse Access Road, 4 expansions in the field, 4 major road jobs. For the first time, the pattern was no longer something Ethan could see only in dirt. It existed on paper, and paper was harder to wash away than tire tracks after the spring storm crossed the pasture. Ethan sent Karen a formal notice the next morning. It was short. He attached Daniel's survey, the county parcel map, photographs of the open fence, and a request that Westfield Ridge preserve every document related to road construction, aggregate purchases, trucking, maintenance access, and work performed near his eastern boundary. He also demanded that no HOA employee or contractor enter the backfield without written permission. Karen did not answer personally. 2 days later, Ethan received a letter from attorney Paul Vetter, counsel for Westfield Ridge. The tone was polished, careful, and noticeably different from Karen's first denial. The HOA, Vetter wrote, possessed historic maintenance access rights, affecting the eastern portion of Ethan's parcel. He claimed those rights allowed Westfield Ridge and its contractors to enter the area for drainage stabilization and community infrastructure maintenance. The letter warned Ethan not to obstruct lawful work. Attached was a photocopy of a 1-page document labeled Maintenance Access Memorandum. Ethan read it 3 times. The document was dated 14 years earlier and referred vaguely to maintaining runoff channels adjacent to the Westfield Ridge boundary. It contained what looked like the signature of Ethan's late uncle, Raymond Walker. The copy was poor, no legal description was attached, no parcel number appeared. There was no recorder stamp, no notary block, and nothing describing gravel removal. More importantly, Ethan had never seen it. He took the copy to the county recorder. The clerk searched by Ethan's name, Raymond's name, Westfield Ridge, the HOA's original developer, and every legal description associated with the ranch. Nothing. The memorandum had never been recorded. Ethan then called the lawyer who had handled Raymond's estate. She still had old closing files in storage and agreed to check them. 2 days later, she called back. No maintenance memorandum in our file, she said. And if there had been something burdening the parcel, I would have expected it to appear in the title work. Ethan asked whether an unrecorded private agreement could still matter. It might, depending on what it actually is and whether it's authentic, she said. But even the copy you sent me doesn't say anyone can remove gravel. That was the point Ethan kept returning to. Karen's story had changed. At the field, she had said the HOA never mined private property and that the depression was natural erosion. Now her lawyer was not denying access. He was claiming a right to enter. Ethan wrote back through his own attorney, Mara Collins, a local civil lawyer known for property disputes. Mara's response was even shorter than Vetter's. Please provide the original. Please identify the recording information. Please identify every occasion on which Westfield Ridge relied upon the memorandum. Please identify the provision authorizing excavation, removal, sale, or use of gravel or other material. Please preserve all related records. The HOA did not provide the original. Instead, Karen sent another notice informing Ethan that the association might need to enter the area to stabilize ongoing erosion affecting community infrastructure. She accused him of creating risk by blocking maintenance access. Mara laughed once when she read it, but Ethan did not. They're trying to move the argument, he said. Yes, Mara replied. First, nothing happened. Now something happened, but they had a right to be there. Next, they may say a contractor misunderstood the right. Ethan looked toward the folder holding the muddy scale ticket. That possibility mattered, because it explained why he needed more than the survey. A judge could look at a disputed memorandum and hear 2 interpretations. A contractor could say it believed someone else had permission. An HOA could blame a maintenance manager. Karen could claim she never knew where truck drivers loaded material. Ethan needed a record that did not depend on anyone's memory. Mara sent a preservation demand to Ridgeline Hauling and the road contractor listed in Westfield Ridge's public budgets. She requested dispatch logs, scale tickets, work orders, invoices, GPS records if retained, and correspondence tied to the project codes Ethan had identified. Within hours, Ridgeline's attorney acknowledged the request. The records, he said, still existed. Ethan stood in his office reading that sentence. Outside, the backfield looked exactly the same as it had the day before. But the case had changed again. Karen had given him an old photocopy to explain the road. Ridgeline was about to show where the road had actually led. That mattered because preserved records could answer questions no faded memorandum could. Who dispatched the trucks? Who approved them? And when and why? The first Ridgeline production came in a cardboard records box and a secured download link. Mara asked Ethan not to touch anything until she had copied the files and logged what had been received. Ridgeline was not admitting wrongdoing. Its lawyer said the company had hauled material under instructions from a general contractor working for Westfield Ridge and was cooperating because the source location had become disputed. The paper records looked ordinary. That was what made them powerful. Each ticket carried a truck identification number, driver code, tare weight, loaded weight, net weight, date, time, job number, and destination. Many included a pickup label. Some said iced excess. Some said Walker back. Others used a short coordinate code that Ethan did not recognize until Mara's paralegal plotted it on a map. Every coordinate landed inside the back field. They began with truck RL214, the number from the muddy ticket Ethan had found beneath the fence. 47 loads, not 17 vehicle movements caught by an unreliable ranch camera. 47 recorded loads tied to that truck alone. Then came RL219, 38 loads. RL231, 52. RL208, 41. The list kept growing. Ridgeline had retained records across several construction seasons because Westfield Ridge's projects were commercial accounts. The oldest digital files were incomplete, but the scale data had been archived for billing. When Ethan and Mara sorted the records by project number, the pattern Daniel's aerial photographs had suggested became precise. Juniper Lane, hundreds of tons, North Loop, more, Hillcrest Drive, more again, Clubhouse Access, another cluster. The trips began early in the morning and often ended before the normal workday. A loaded truck would leave Ethan's backfield, enter Westfield Ridge through the service lane, and appear on the delivery side of the same job code minutes later. Ridgeline's GPS data was available for only the newer trucks, but it was devastating. One vehicle's route showed it stopping inside Ethan's parcel for 11 minutes, then driving directly to Hillcrest Drive, where its load was recorded as road base. Another repeated the same trip 6 times in one day. Another made 9 trips over 2 days. Ethan watched the dots move on a map and felt something colder than anger. For years, while he had been repairing fence, cutting hay, paying taxes, and assuming the quiet land behind the cottonwoods was exactly where he had left it, trucks had been running a private supply line through his own property. Mara kept him focused. "Don't total the money yet," she said. "Total the facts." They created a master chronology. For each trip, they listed the truck, driver, pickup label, weight, timestamp, destination, HOA, job number, and any matching GPS entry. If a ticket lacked a reliable source location, they marked it unconfirmed rather than forcing it into the count. Ethan insisted on that. He did not need every questionable load. He needed a number nobody could honestly attack. Even after excluding incomplete entries, the confirmed total passed 20,000 tons, then 30, then 40. By the time they finished the first full reconciliation, more than 2,000 individual loads were tied directly or strongly to the backfield. Daniel compared the tonnage with his volume estimate. Gravel density varied, but the numbers fell inside the range his survey predicted. The dirt and the paperwork agreed. Karen's first statement, that no HOA vehicle had ever removed a load, was no longer merely doubtful. It was impossible. They checked the excluded tickets again, but Ethan refused to add them because they looked suspicious. Some lacked coordinates. Others used generic source labels. Mara marked them separately. The confirmed count was already strong enough. If the disputed loads were proven, they could be added. For now, Ethan wanted the number Karen could not reduce by argument. Mara sent Vetter a sample packet containing 12 tickets, 3 GPS traces, photographs of the access road, and Daniel's map. His reply arrived the next afternoon. Westfield Ridge, he wrote, had no knowledge of any unauthorized removal and would investigate contractor practices. Ethan read the sentence aloud. No knowledge. Mara nodded. That's the new position. But while she was sorting the invoices attached to Ridgeline's files, she stopped on one spreadsheet. Ethan. He looked over. The column was labeled Material Cost. Several backfield loads had amounts posted beside them. Not just hauling charges, material charges. Westfield Ridge had been billed as if gravel had been purchased for those loads. Ethan looked from the invoice to the map of his property. The HOA had not simply received gravel taken from his field. Someone appeared to have charged residents for buying it. That discovery pulled the story beyond Ethan's fence. Westfield Ridge published annual budgets to its members. Mara obtained 6 years of them from residents who had begun asking questions after survey crews appeared near the back field. The documents listed road assessments in broad categories: aggregate purchase, trucking, grading, drainage, resurfacing, and reserve contributions. On paper, nothing looked extraordinary. The HOA had rebuilt several miles of private roads. Gravel cost money. Trucks cost money. Equipment cost money. Then Ethan placed the ridgeline load data beside the budgets. The same project code appeared in both. For Hillcrest Drive, residents had been assessed for purchased aggregate from a commercial quarry. Ridgeline's records, however, showed hundreds of tons under that job code loaded from Walker-Barkack and delivered directly to Hillcrest. For the North Loop, the same thing happened. For the Clubhouse Road again. Mara brought in Leon Brooks, a forensic accountant who specialized in construction billing. Leon refused to use the word fraud when he first saw the records. "Not yet," he said. "First, we find out what they paid, what they received, and who approved it." That became the next layer of the chronology. Leon matched contractor invoices to board payment approvals. He separated legitimate quarry purchases from loads originating at Ethan's property. He compared material quantities, trucking fees, fuel surcharges, and vendor payments. Some invoices were clean. Others contained blended totals that made the source difficult to see unless someone compared them with the dispatch records. One pattern stood out. The HOA was often charged a per-ton material price on top of hauling. That meant Westfield Ridge members had paid as though a supplier had sold the gravel. But for the confirmed backfield loads, Ethan had never sold anyone anything. "Maybe the contractor billed the HOA and kept the difference," Ethan said. "Possible," Leon answered. "Maybe the HOA didn't know." "Also possible." Ethan appreciated the answer. He had no interest in replacing one unsupported accusation with another. So Leon traced the approvals. Westfield Ridge required large road invoices to pass through a 3-person review: the maintenance manager, the treasurer, and the board president. Martin Keene's initials appeared repeatedly. Treasurer Susan Bell approved the payment batches. Karen's electronic authorization released them. That still did not prove she knew the material source. Then a resident named Harold Finch gave Mara a stack of old board packets he had saved in his garage. Harold had lived in Westfield Ridge for 11 years and had spent much of that time complaining about assessments. He was not an ally of Ethan's. In fact, he had once argued at a county meeting that Ethan should pay toward neighborhood drainage because runoff crossed near the subdivision. But Harold disliked missing numbers more than he disliked Ethan. One packet mentioned local aggregate savings and adjacent material availability. Neither named Ethan's land. The language was vague enough to be harmless by itself. Combined with the truck records, it became harder to ignore. Word spread among residents. Karen called a special HOA meeting and told homeowners that an outside landowner was attempting to inflate a private boundary dispute into an attack on the association's finances. She said the roads had been built under approved contracts and that every assessment had been properly authorized. Ethan did not attend. Mara advised him to stay away until they had finished accounting for the loads. But residents asked a simple question Karen struggled to answer. If the HOA paid for purchased quarry gravel, which quarry sold the gravel tied to the Walker-Back tickets? Karen said vendor sourcing was a contractor issue. Leon checked the invoices. Several listed material costs without naming a quarry at all. He then compared quantities. The tonnage billed under certain phases came within a few percentage points of the tonnage Ridgeline had hauled from Ethan's field. The issue was no longer whether residents had paid for road work. They plainly had. The issue was whether part of those payments represented material that nobody had the right to sell. Susan Bell, the treasurer, requested an executive review. Martin stopped returning calls. And Karen, according to 2 board members, insisted that all questions be routed through counsel. Mara looked at the approval chain on her screen. 3 people signed these batches, she said. Ethan nodded. Which means, Leon added, we need to know what those 3 people were told. That answer was sitting somewhere in the work orders, emails, and dispatch instructions. And for the first time, Karen was no longer defending only a hole in Ethan's field. She was defending the money collected from every homeowner who had paid to build the roads above it. Karen's next move was predictable only after it happened. At the following Westfield Ridge board meeting, she placed the blame on the contractor. The meeting was packed. Residents stood along the back wall while Karen read from a prepared statement explaining that Westfield Ridge had hired licensed professionals, approved road improvements in good faith, and relied on vendors to obtain materials lawfully. If any contractor had sourced gravel from private property without permission, she said, the association had been deceived too. For the first time, her explanation sounded plausible. Ethan heard about it from Harold and admitted as much. A board president did not normally ride in every dump truck. A payment approval could show that Karen authorized an invoice without proving she knew where the material originated. If a contractor had found a free source and billed the HOA at quarry prices, the contractor could have pocketed the difference while everyone else remained unaware. Mara had already anticipated that defense. She sent the general contractor, Carver Civil, the same preservation notice Ridgeline had received. Carver's attorney responded aggressively at first, denying unauthorized excavation and warning against defamatory accusations. Then Ridgeline produced its dispatch logs. 2 days later, Carver changed tone. The company turned over work orders. Those records included instructions sent from Westfield Ridge's maintenance office to Carver supervisors. They identified project numbers, expected tonnage, delivery locations, and on multiple days, pickup instructions reading Iced N5 Access or Local Back N5. Some orders were signed electronically by Martin Keene. Karen's name did not appear on most of them. For a few hours, it looked as though Martin might be the end of the chain. Then Ridgeline's telematics data arrived in full for the newest construction season. The GPS histories did more than show trucks entering Ethan's land. They showed repeated patterns scheduled around his routine. Loads often began before 6, when Ethan was at the livestock auction or feed supplier. During 1 week when he traveled to help his sister, activity jumped. 9 loads Tuesday, 11 Wednesday, 8 Thursday. Ethan had never posted his schedule publicly. How would they know you were gone? Mara asked. He thought about it. Westfield Ridge maintenance crews could see his driveway from the service road. Martin had occasionally spoken with Ethan about fence repairs. Karen had once complained that Ethan's cattle trailer blocked visibility near the county intersection. But speculation was not evidence, so Mara requested communications between the HOA and Carver. The first emails were ordinary: paving schedules, drainage questions, complaints about dust. Then she found a thread with the subject line Hillcrest Sanko. A Carver superintendent asked whether the local field source was approved for tinted use. Mart replied, yes. Keep access on east side. Avoid daytime traffic when possible. Another message asked who owned the material. Martin answered, HOA has long-standing maintenance rights. Proceed under existing direction. Still no Karen. Then 4 messages later, Martin wrote, Karen wants this phase finished before month end. Use local source to keep costs down. It was not proof that Karen had ordered trespass, but it was the first time her name appeared in the operational chain. Mara kept digging. A separate email from Carver asked whether a written purchase order was needed for gravel coming from the local source. Martin replied, no PO for material itself, bill standard road package. Leon read that sentence twice. If no material purchase order existed, why had material costs appeared in the HOA's road packages? Carver's attorney requested a meeting. At that meeting, the company produced handwritten supervisor notes and said it had been told by Westfield Ridge that the association controlled the backfield gravel under an old access agreement. Carver admitted it should have verified the source but denied inventing the location. Karen publicly called that statement self-serving. She said Martin had exceeded his authority. Martin, now represented by his own lawyer, stopped cooperating with the board. For one day, Karen's defense seemed to improve. She could say a maintenance manager and contractor had acted beyond her knowledge. Then Mara found an older email buried in a PDF attachment to a budget packet. It had been printed years earlier, scanned with unrelated documents and forgotten. The sender was Karen. The recipients were Martin and the HOA treasurer. The subject was road cost obations. The line that mattered contained only 6 words. Maximize free backfield material before purchase. Ethan read it once, then again. Karen had spent weeks moving the blame from erosion to access rights, from access rights to contractors, and from contractors to Martin. Now her own words were sitting in the same chronology as the truck records, and there was no contractor standing between her and that sentence. Mara filed for a temporary order preventing anyone from entering, grading, filling, or otherwise altering the disputed area until an independent inspection could be completed. The hearing was set for Friday morning. On Thursday night, Ethan's phone alerted him at 11:42. Motion detected near the east pasture. He opened the camera feed and saw headlights moving where no vehicle should have been. For a moment, he assumed someone had ignored the notice and returned for more gravel. Then the first dump truck backed toward the excavation and raised its bed. It was carrying dirt in. Ethan was out the door within minutes, but Mara answered his call before he reached the field. "Do not block them with your truck," she said. "Do not touch their equipment. Record everything and call the sheriff." By the time Ethan reached the ridge, 3 dump trucks were working under portable lights. A skid steer pushed brown fill across the pale gravel floor. The new material was being spread along the deepest wall of the cut. Ethan parked on his side of the pasture and began filming. He captured plates, truck numbers, the skid steer, the open fence, the direction of travel, and the time displayed on his phone. He narrated only what he could see. At 11:58, a supervisor walked toward him wearing a reflective jacket. "You need to stay back from the operation." "You're on my property," Ethan said. "We have a stabilization order." "From whom?" "Westfield Ridge." Ethan almost smiled at the answer. Karen had spent months insisting the HOA had not created the excavation. Now, hours before an inspection hearing, its contractor was working in the center of it. He asked for the work order. The supervisor refused to hand over his copy but held it long enough for Ethan's camera to capture the top line. "Emergency erosion stabilization," issued that afternoon. "Authorized by Westfield Ridge Maintenance." The sheriff's deputy arrived at 12:17. Ethan showed him the deed, Daniel's survey, Mara's preservation notice, and the pending court filing. The supervisor showed the old maintenance memorandum. The deputy wisely refused to decide a property lawsuit in the dark. He ordered everyone to stop moving material until ownership and authority could be verified. The skid steer shut down. By then, 6 truckloads of fill had been dumped. Mara arrived just after 1 in the morning with Daniel Price and a private documentation crew she had managed to wake. Daniel was furious, but not because the field had been damaged again. "Do you understand what filling this wall would do?" he asked. Ethan did. The exposed profile showed the sequence of excavation. Different cuts, slopes, gravel layers, and machinery marks could help establish how the pit had expanded. Burying it under fresh fill would make that analysis harder. Daniel photographed every exposed face under portable lights. He took measurements, marked reference points, and collected images showing where the fresh fill ended and the original cut remained visible. The timing mattered almost as much as the dirt. Had Ethan arrived the next morning, the deepest wall might have vanished beneath fresh fill before anyone competent documented it properly. At 2:06, another vehicle arrived. Karen stepped out. She did not come down into the field. She stood near the open fence and told the deputy the HOA had acted because erosion threatened a community drainage system. She accused Ethan of refusing necessary stabilization. Mara asked one question. "If this pit is natural and Westfield Ridge did not create it, how did your office know which wall needed filling before the court's inspection?" Karen said engineers had identified the risk. "Which engineers?" "I'm not discussing privileged work product at 2 in the morning. Mara nodded toward Daniel's team. "That's fine. Preserve it." Karen's face tightened. At the Friday hearing, the judge reviewed Ethan's video, the emergency work order, the survey, and the history of conflicting explanations. He issued a temporary injunction barring Westfield Ridge and its contractors from entering the parcel or changing the excavation until a court-appointed expert completed an inspection. The HOA argued that the night work had been protective, not destructive. The judge did not decide intent. He did not need to. He simply ordered the scene preserved. The court-appointed engineer arrived Monday. Because Ethan, Mara, and Daniel had stopped the fill operation after only 6 loads, most of the excavation profile remained exposed. The expert mapped it independently and confirmed the same broad conclusion Daniel had reached. This was not a naturally formed depression. It showed repeated mechanical removal over time. The attempt to stabilize erosion had accomplished something Karen probably had not intended. It created a fresh time-stamped work order tying Westfield Ridge directly to the exact location she had spent months describing as someone else's problem. The independent inspection gave Mara what she needed to stop arguing about isolated facts and start presenting a system. She built the case around 6 columns: original ground volume, estimated material removed, confirmed truck tonnage, pickup location, delivery project, payment record. Daniel Price supplied the first 2. Ridgeline supplied the next 3. Leon Brooks supplied the last. When the records were placed side by side, the gaps nearly disappeared. The court-appointed engineer calculated a probable removal range that closely matched Daniel's earlier estimate. Ridgeline's confirmed loads accounted for most of that volume once ordinary density variation was included. The remaining difference fell within a range explained by older missing records, material redistributed on site, and natural surface loss Daniel had already excluded from his accusation. Mara did not claim mathematical perfection. She did something stronger. She showed that independent records created for complete reasons all pointed to the same history. Survey data existed to measure land. Scale tickets existed to bill truck weight. GPS data existed to manage vehicles. HOA project codes existed to track road work. Invoices existed to request payment. Board approvals existed to release money. None had been created for Ethan's lawsuit. Yet when combined, they told the same story. At the evidentiary hearing, Ridgeline's operations manager explained how tickets were generated. Trucks were weighed empty, dispatched to a source, weighed or estimated according to project procedure, and logged into a job account. He identified the naming conventions used for Ethan's field and authenticated the GPS records for trucks equipped with telematics. Carver Civil's project manager testified next. He acknowledged that crews had been instructed to use the backfield as a local materials source. He said Westfield Ridge representatives had assured Carver that the association possessed access rights. When asked who gave that assurance, he named Martin Keene. Then Mara showed him the email that said Karen wanted the phase finished using the local source. The project manager hesitated. "Yes," he said. "We understood the direction came from the association." Daniel presented the terrain models. He showed before the first visible cut, after the Juniper Lane project, after North Loop, after Hillcrest, and after the Clubhouse Road. Each image displayed an excavation that grew in the same periods the truck records showed increased hauling. Then Leon presented the money. He did not dramatize it. He simply traced tons. A confirmed load from Ethan's property entered a Westfield Ridge project code. That code entered a contractor invoice. The invoice entered a payment batch. The batch passed through maintenance and finance review. The board president's authorization released the payment. Again and again and again. Karen's lawyer attacked the chain at every point. Maybe Walker Back referred to a different site. The GPS coordinates answered that. Maybe erosion caused most of the pit. The independent engineer answered that. Maybe the gravel went somewhere other than HOA roads. Destination tickets answered that. Maybe Karen never knew the source. Her own email answered part of that, and board packets referring to adjacent material availability answered more. Maybe the old maintenance memorandum allowed removal. Mara put the text on a screen. It said nothing about mining, sale, extraction, or ownership of gravel. By the afternoon, Karen was not facing one devastating document. She was facing hundreds of ordinary documents that reinforced one another. That was harder to explain away. The court did not rule on final damages that day. Instead, it made factual findings sufficient to continue the injunction and ordered expanded financial discovery. Westfield Ridge was required to preserve and disclose road project records, communications, contractor agreements, and supporting invoices. Outside the courthouse, a reporter asked Ethan whether he felt vindicated. He declined to give an interview. Mara asked him why. "Because we still don't know the number," he said. She knew which number he meant. They knew how much gravel had moved. They knew where it went. They knew what residents had been billed under road packages. What they did not yet know was how much Westfield Ridge had actually saved by using Ethan's material, how much had been charged as material cost anyway, and how much restoring the field would require. That answer would determine whether the case was about an expensive trespass or something much larger. Leon spent the next 3 weeks finding it. That was why the case strengthened each time a separate system agreed. Leon's final schedule did not contain one dramatic number. It contained several. First came the gravel itself. Using the confirmed tonnage, prevailing local aggregate prices during each construction season, and conservative assumptions for loads with incomplete pricing, he calculated the market value of material taken from Ethan's property. He separated that from transportation because the trucks had been paid independently. Then came restoration. The court-appointed engineer estimated what it would cost to return the back field to a stable, usable grade. The work required engineered fill, compaction in lifts, reconstruction of the drainage line, replacement topsoil, erosion control matting, reseeding, and a rebuilt fence. Because the excavation had changed runoff patterns, the plan also included monitoring through 2 storm seasons. That estimate was larger than the raw value of the gravel. Then Leon turned to Westfield Ridge's books. Residents had unquestionably received roads, so he did not treat every road assessment as improper. He isolated only charges connected to material costs that could not be reconciled with legitimate quarry purchases. In several phases, invoices had included standard aggregate pricing, even though dispatch records showed the corresponding loads originating on Ethan's land. Some charges appeared to be contractor markups. Others flowed through bundled road packages. The documentation was messy enough that responsibility had to be divided among the HOA, Carver Civil, and specific decision makers rather than assigned with a slogan. Mara preferred it that way. A case built carefully could survive. A case inflated for applause could collapse. Expanded discovery also changed the politics inside Westfield Ridge. Treasurer Susan Bell produced emails showing that she had repeatedly asked Martin Keene for source documentation on unusually low road costs. Martin often replied that Karen had approved local sourcing. Susan admitted she had signed payment batches without forcing the issue further. 2 other board members testified that Karen regularly described the nearby material as an HOA benefit under historic access rights. Martin eventually gave a sworn statement. He said Karen had told him years earlier that the association could use gravel from the backfield because an old maintenance agreement gave Westfield Ridge control over material needed for roads and drainage. He admitted he never obtained a legal opinion supporting that interpretation. When shown the memorandum, he acknowledged that the words were not there. Karen continued to deny intentional wrongdoing. She argued that she had relied on long-standing practice and believed the HOA had lawful access. Her attorney emphasized that civil liability did not automatically prove criminal intent. Mara did not need to overreach. The civil evidence was enough. After mediation failed, the court entered findings that Westfield Ridge had no recorded extraction right, that the maintenance language did not convey ownership of gravel, and that repeated removal had occurred from Ethan's parcel. The association and contractor were held responsible in differing shares for material value, restoration costs, professional expenses, and other recoverable losses established by the evidence. Separate accounting adjustments were ordered for affected HOA road charges, with residents receiving credits and refunds where billing could not be supported. The combined financial consequences reached several $1,000,000, but Ethan never treated the total as a trophy. Most of it represented something simple: putting back what had been removed, fixing what had been damaged, paying for years of measurable loss, and correcting charges that should never have been passed through as though the material had come from a quarry. Karen's position collapsed before the final accounting was complete. A majority of the Westfield Ridge Board voted to remove her as president. The association hired independent management and adopted new requirements for contractor sourcing, easement verification, and public review of large road expenditures. Martin resigned. Carver Civil settled its portion and agreed to fund part of the restoration. Ridgeline, whose records had become the backbone of the case, was not accused of knowingly taking Ethan's property after evidence showed its drivers followed dispatch instructions supplied through the contractor. The company strengthened its source verification policy anyway. State investigators requested copies of the financial record for their own review. Ethan and Mara did not speculate publicly about what might follow. Their case had never depended on promising an arrest. It depended on proving loads, and by the end, every confirmed load had a weight, a date, a truck, a route, and a destination. Karen had once called the backfield a natural gravel depression. The final orders called it something far less convenient: property that had been excavated without lawful authority. The arithmetic had finally become accountability. By the following spring, the backfield no longer looked like a case file. It looked like land again. Truckloads of clean fill had been placed under the engineer's supervision, compacted in measured layers, and graded to restore the old slope. New drainage carried runoff toward the south pasture without pooling. Topsoil covered the disturbed area. Grass pushed through the first season thin and uneven, then returned thicker after the rains. The access road through the cottonwoods was broken up and reseeded. The fence was rebuilt on the surveyed line. Ethan kept the gate, not because he expected anyone to come back, but because he liked being able to drive down once in a while and look across the field without seeing a wound in it. Westfield Ridge looked different too. The roads were still there. Families still drove to work, children still rode bicycles along Juniper Lane, and delivery vans still turned onto Hillcrest without thinking about what lay beneath their tires. The association had not disappeared. It had simply become quieter, more transparent, and much more careful about documents. Harold Finch stopped by one afternoon while Ethan was repairing a water line. "You know," Harold said, looking toward the subdivision, "most of us never wondered where road gravel came from." "Most people shouldn't have to," Ethan replied. Harold nodded. "We should have wondered where the money went. That was closer to the truth." The case had never been solved by one dramatic confession. Karen never stood in a meeting and admitted she knew she had no right to take Ethan's gravel. There was no single secret ledger marked stolen property. No witness had seen every load. What existed was less theatrical and far more difficult to escape. A survey showed what was missing. A scale ticket showed one load. Camera footage showed a truck. Dispatch records showed hundreds more. GPS placed them in the field, Project codes followed them into Westfield Ridge. Invoices followed the project codes into payment batches. Emails showed what people called the source when they thought nobody outside the system would ever read the words. Each record had been created for an ordinary reason. Together, they became a history. Ethan kept copies of the important documents in a cabinet at his office, but only one piece stayed on the shelf above his desk. The muddy scale ticket, RL24, 19 tons and change. The paper had dried stiff and wrinkled. One corner was torn. The ink had faded where rainwater reached it before Ethan pulled it from beneath the fence. He never framed the ticket or cleaned mud from it. That would have made it look important in a way it never was. Its power came from being ordinary, the kind of record people ignore, because they assume nobody will need to place it beside 1,000 others. By itself, it was almost nothing. One truck, one morning, one load. But that load had asked a question the whole could not answer. If this trip happened, how many others happened too? Years earlier, whoever used the back field had apparently counted on the fact that gravel disappeared quietly. Once it was crushed into a road, no homeowner could point to a stone and say where it had come from. Dirt did not keep receipts. Trucks did. They recorded times. They recorded weights. They recorded numbers. They recorded routes. And when those records were finally placed in order, nobody will know stopped being a plan. Ethan looked out toward the restored field as evening settled over the cottonwoods. The grass moved where truck tires had once cut through mud, and the fence line ran straight again. Ownership was never determined by how long someone got away with crossing a boundary, and a quiet piece of paper, forgotten in the weeds, had proven every load that crossed his.